Now it's time to attach the blade pieces. We're really getting somewhere. I like doing the blade work when I just have piece 2 and piece 3 attached, because that way I still have a flat surface that I can work with when it comes to attaching the blade pieces. So it's pretty straightforward, as you might expect. I'm still using G-Flex, and this time I make up an even smaller batch. If you are feeling relaxed, I make a tiny batch and I put epoxy on the inner blade pieces, and I put them both on at the same time. With the luxury of a clean workbench, you can continue doing this portion of the project just on the flat of your bench. There's no bending to be done, and all you're really looking for is a minimum amount of squeezing to make sure that the blade pieces adhere to this center shaft strip. Another alternative, if you're into making jigs, and this is, I do a fair amount of these, so I do have jigs set up because I think jigs make things a little easier in general. This jig, again, I've got wax paper on the bottom, and I make sure that wax paper has no holes under my work area, and I'm going to scoop and apply the epoxy onto the face there, and then I'm going to I'm pressing my center shaft strip. Now I'm applying the next inner shaft strip, and now I can get some scrap. We're just going to pretend this is this would actually work, but you could get scrap and literally press it and then drill it into place and hold it. Put some wax paper in here too, by the way. Or you can get another piece of this shelf board edging and use that and drill it into place again with wax paper. I also like using clamps. The jig has legs on it, so it's up off the ground, so you could do something like that. And if you make it short enough, you could also clamp from this side. Generally with straight shaft paddles, it's easy enough just to screw stuff in. You could also screw stuff into your work surface if you want. You could be putting a 3/4 inch piece of plywood down on your work surface and screwing into that. You have all sorts of options. You just want something that's flat, that you trust, that you can rest these pieces on. And gently, again, you don't want to squeeze all of the epoxy out. But just gently clamp and let this epoxy dry and penetrate the wood and create the bond. So this is then the first step, and there's a variety of different ways to do it. Okay, so now we're going to let that go for 3 or 4 hours, and we'll come back. Okay, so now we're back. We're just pretending that time has gone by and the connection is made and things are dry. You could take this up and clean it off as much or as little as you want. Again, it's pretty important to keep this flat surface and these square edges as flat and square as you can. You don't want any nicks, because the next step then is attaching the big blade pieces. And this I pretty much just do one at a time. And the jig still works quite nicely. You can put the first piece in there. And again, you're just applying, you make a small batch of G-Flex, maybe the size of a dime, a couple of smallish drops, just enough to wet the surface that's going to bond with the prior piece, okay? So set that down on the form, get everything lined up, and then we're back to clamping everything in place, making sure it all stays flat and good, and letting it dry. Sometimes if I'm worried about pieces that might be warping, I also will take a piece of scrap and put the scrap over the top, again with wax paper in place. And then I'll clamp here and here just to keep everything flat while the epoxy's drying. Generally, I find it easier to do one blade piece at a time since there's only half as many things to worry about when things are moving around and you want to get everything aligned. With the first one dry, it's almost anticlimactic to put the second piece on. Again, you're just checking to make sure everything's lined up and flat. Mix up another batch of the G-Flex. Tiny little amount, you know, the size of a dime. Wet your surface. Use wax paper so you're not bonding the blade to the work surface, and gently squeeze it together using, you know, whatever pieces and parts work for you. And again, you can do a jig and get legs, so you've got some easy clearance to work clamps in, or you can just work flat on your work surface. I guess we should have this up. This is really what you're working with here, since the first thing we did was apply 2 and 3 to the shaft. So we're going with this.